Northwood, Michigan, 1987. A quiet town wrapped in pine forests and early morning fog. A place where people rarely locked their doors, and every face was familiar. But on September 14th, that peace shattered. Because on that day, someone committed a crime Northwood had never seen before. A crime that would go unsolved for 36 years. A crime that began with a scream no one heard, and ended with a discovery the entire community would spend decades trying to forget. This is the story of Jeannette Ralston, a woman whose disappearance haunted families, frightened children, and carved itself into the collective memory of a town not built to carry that kind of darkness. And this is a story of how, decades later, a single piece of evidence, forgotten, dusty, nearly thrown out, would finally expose a truth no one was prepared for. If you're watching, make sure you're subscribed, because what you're about to hear is one of the most shocking cold case resolutions in recent American history. Jeannette Ralston was 28 years old in 1987, a second-grade teacher at Northwood Elementary, the kind of teacher children adored and parents trusted without question. She had a gentle voice, the sort that calmed crying children and softened even the sternest parent-teacher meetings. She wore her hair in soft curls, kept her classroom full of hand-painted posters, and wrote personalized birthday notes for every student. Even the quiet ones, even the difficult ones. But Jeannette's life wasn't perfect. Her marriage had ended the previous year. She had just moved into a small duplex on Maple Ridge Road, trying to rebuild, trying to start fresh. And for the most part, she seemed to be succeeding. She went jogging every morning, taught during the day, tutored struggling kids in the evenings, and spent her weekends visiting her sister in the next town over. But there was something else, something the people in Northwood never really talked about back then. Jeannette had started receiving strange phone calls. Anonymous, brief, always silence on the other end. She mentioned it only twice to her sister and to a friend at school, brushing it off as probably kids or a wrong number. But the calls kept coming. And in a town where everyone knew everyone, silence on the phone was somehow more ominous than words. Still, no one imagined what was coming. No one had any idea that Jeannette was being watched, followed, studied, until the night she vanished. And with that, we enter the chapter that changed everything. The last confirmed sighting of Jeannette Ralston was at 7:42 p.m., recorded on a security camera outside Larkin's Grocery, just a few blocks from her home. She walks out carrying a brown paper bag, a carton of milk, 2 apples, a box of tea. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. She waves at someone across the parking lot, someone the police would never identify, and then gets into her blue Toyota Corolla. From there, the trail should have been simple. She had only a 3-minute drive home, a straight road, no traffic, no detours. But Jeannette never made it home. Her car was found the next morning, parked neatly in her driveway. The groceries were still in the back seat. Her purse was on the passenger side. But Jeannette was gone. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints, no forced entry, no neighbors reporting anything unusual. It was as if she walked into her home and vanished into thin air. And for a town unaccustomed to danger, the fear set in fast. Parents kept their children inside. People began locking doors for the first time in years. And a search effort involving hundreds of volunteers combed the woods for nearly a week. But nothing, not a scrap of clothing, not a single clue, was found. And then 10 days later, the case took a turn so disturbing it changed the investigation forever. The night of September 14th, 1987, started like any other for Jeannette. Her neighbor, Mrs. Ellison, the elderly widow who lived in the adjoining duplex, remembered seeing her pull into the driveway around 7:50 p.m., headlights sweeping across the split yard. She waved, Mrs. Ellison recalled. That sweet smile she had, the kind that made you smile back even if you were having a terrible day. But that was the last time anyone saw her alive. What Mrs. Ellison didn't know, what she wouldn't learn until decades later, was that a dark-colored pickup truck had driven past the duplex at least twice earlier that evening. Not fast, not slow, just enough to look like someone scouting the area. It wouldn't matter then. It matters now. According to investigators, Jeannette likely entered her home somewhere between 7:52 and 7:55 p.m. Inside, police later found her keys still in the front door lock, mail scattered on the entryway table, her shoes neatly placed beside the welcome mat, and her answering machine blinking with a new message she never played. Nothing was overturned, nothing broken, no sign of forced entry or panic. It was as if she stepped into the house and had every intention to stay until something interrupted her routine. One of the most haunting details later discovered was this. Jeannette had begun boiling water. A pot sat on the stove, slightly warm when police arrived the next morning, meaning she hadn't planned to leave, meaning she thought the knock on her door, or the noise at the window, or the shadow on the porch was someone she knew. That detail would become one of the foundational questions of the case. Who did Jeannette trust enough to open her door to at night? When Jeannette failed to show up at Northwood Elementary the next morning, her colleague, Helen Ortiz, called the school secretary. She wasn't the kind of person to miss a day without warning, Helen said later. The kids adored her. She'd crawl to class before letting them go without a lesson. By 9:15 a.m., the principal had called her home. No answer. By 10 a.m., police were on the way. By noon, the search had begun. The response was immediate and enormous. That was the kind of town Northwood was. Nearly 300 volunteers showed up within the first 24 hours. Farmers, teachers, church groups, teenagers who had once been in her class. Search dogs were brought in from 2 counties over. Helicopters with heat sensors scanned the forest edges. Police combed through acres of woodland, drainage ditches, barns, creek beds, and abandoned sheds. They knocked on doors, questioned drivers, interviewed every known acquaintance she had. Yet the town's optimism, its initial belief that she had simply gotten lost or needed help, faded by the second evening. On the third day, the sheriff addressed the community. "We believe foul play is involved." Those words hit Northwood like a hammer. For a community that measured time not by clocks but by seasons, for a town where the loudest sound after sunset was usually crickets, the idea that one of their own had been taken was unbearable. Parents began walking their children to school. Women refused to jog alone. Locks sold out at the local hardware store. People started leaving porch lights on all night for the first time in decades. The innocence of Northwood wasn't just shaken, it was shattered. Detectives found 3 things of interest inside Jeannette's home during the initial sweep. Outside, next to the porch, a ceramic garden gnome lay broken on the ground. Jeannette's sister insisted it wasn't broken the last time she visited. It looked like it had been struck or stepped on. Police documented it, bagged to pieces, and then did nothing with it. With today's standards, that gnome would have been a DNA treasure. But in 1987, no one realized it might hold prints, fibers, or skin cells. The gnome became a symbol of everything the investigation overlooked. Detectives pulled her phone records. 10 calls from a payphone near Miller's gas station, all after 8 p.m., all with no message. When the clerk was questioned, he only said, "Could have been anyone. People use that booth all day." Again, a potential lead evaporated. Inside her home, near the front door, a few dark synthetic fibers were found. Fibers that didn't match her carpet, clothing, or car interior. They were sent to a state lab. The report came back inconclusive. The fibers were boxed away, labeled, and shelved. No one realized they'd become crucial 30 years later. Every missing person case starts the same way. You look at the people closest to the victim. And Northwood had opinions. Lots of them. Mark and Jeannette had divorced a year earlier after 7 years of marriage. "Too many arguments," her sister said. "Too much drinking," Mark admitted. He was publicly emotional during the search. He helped organize volunteer teams. He cried on the news. But some people weren't convinced. He didn't have a strong alibi. He said he was at home alone the night she vanished. No witnesses. Police questioned him 3 times. But nothing linked him to the disappearing calls. Nothing placed him near her home. Eventually, he was cleared. Still, for years, whispers followed him everywhere he went. Roy worked at Northwood Elementary. Quiet, awkward, kept to himself. He lived alone in a small trailer outside town, and owned a truck similar to the one seen driving past Jeannette's home that evening. Police searched his property. They found nothing. His truck had been recently washed, but he insisted it was because of mud from the county fairgrounds. No evidence, no motive, no history of violence. He remained a person of interest, but nothing tied him to crime. Witnesses reported seeing a man near Larkin's grocery around the time Jeannette was shopping. He was described as mid-30s, brown hair, wearing a denim jacket, standing near the payphones. The same payphones used to call her home. He was never identified, never found, never ruled out. Some believe he was the real perpetrator. Some believe he was just passing through. Either way, he was gone before the search even began. 10 days after her disappearance, on September 24th, two brothers hiking near the old Northwood quarry found something strange. A blue scarf caught on a tree branch. Jeannette owned a scarf just like it. When investigators arrived, they searched the area meticulously. About 20 yards from the trail, down a small embankment, they found disturbed leaves, then clothing fibers, then fragments of human hair. And then at the base of a fallen log, they found the first confirmed piece of Jeannette Ralston, a delicate silver earring in the shape of a teardrop. Her sister identified it immediately. The site became the new focus of the investigation. Dozens of officers scoured the woods, draining nearby water pockets and sifting through soil. But they found no body, no footprints, no obvious drag marks, just scattered fragments. Enough to say she had been there, but not enough to say what happened. For the first time, the community accepted what they had been avoiding. Jeannette wasn't missing. She was gone. Local news stations camped outside the sheriff's office. Reporters asked questions the department couldn't answer. Was it a kidnapping? A targeted attack? A random act? Was there a serial predator? Had they missed warning signs? Detectives tried to reassure the town, but confidence was slipping. Evidence was thin. Leads were dry. And for the first time, people began to wonder whether the sheriff's department was capable of solving the case at all. Families began locking their windows during the day. Teenagers weren't allowed out after dusk. Rumors spread about a killer roaming freely. Yet the police had no suspect they could confidently charge. Weeks became months. Months became years. Years became decades. Northwood moved on, at least on the surface. But the absence of justice left a hollow place in the community's history. Parents told their children Jeannette's story as a warning. Never open the door after dark. Don't walk alone. Always let someone know where you're going. The memory of Jeannette Ralston became a quiet ghost, woven into the town's caution. But the case didn't die. Not entirely. Because in 2005, nearly 20 years later, something unexpected happened. A newly hired evidence technician reviewing cold case boxes discovered something odd. The dark fibers found in Jeannette's doorway, originally logged as unknown synthetic fibers, were never compared to any vehicle upholstery. Not one. At the time, the lab had assumed the fibers came from clothing. With no match, they labeled them non-evidentiary. But in 2005, technology had improved. Polymer analysis had advanced. Trace identification was easier, faster, more precise. The technician requested retesting. This time, the report came back with match. The fibers were from the interior carpeting of a 1985 Ford F-150, a dark-colored pickup truck. The same type of truck seen circling her neighborhood the night she disappeared. Detectives combed through the old suspect list. Almost none owned that model, except one, Roy Barnes, the school custodian, the man the town had quietly suspected, then forgotten. It was the first new lead in nearly 20 years. But when investigators tracked Roy down, he was already gone. He had moved to Indiana in 1998, then to Ohio, then years later to Kentucky. By the time detectives caught up with him, he had died of a heart attack in 2003. A dead end, a maddening one. The case sank back into silence. Again, Northwood never fully healed. Every year on the anniversary of her disappearance, Jeannette's family held a candlelight vigil outside the elementary school. Students who had once been in her class, now adults with children of their own, returned to honor the teacher who had shaped their early years. They shared stories. How she stayed late to help them with reading. How she kept extra snacks for hungry kids. How she defended bullied students. How she once gave her lunch to a child who forgot theirs. Her classroom had long since been repainted, her posters taken down, her supplies replaced, but her presence lingered. The school created a small memorial garden beside the playground. Flowers, a bench, a plaque with her name. But memorials are not justice, and the wound remained open for decades until 2023, when a discovery, made completely by accident, breathed life back into the case. A discovery that would change the story forever and reveal a truth far more sinister than anyone imagined. Before we continue, if you want more deep-dive true crime stories like this, cold cases, solved cases, and the unexpected twist behind them, make sure you're subscribed. It helps more than you know, and it allows the forgotten stories to be told with the respect they deserve. Sometimes cases are solved because someone confesses. Sometimes because new technology surfaces a clue. And sometimes, like in Jeannette's case, because of pure accident. In early 2023, 36 years after Jeannette vanished, the Northwood Sheriff's Department moved into a new, modern facility. During the move, boxes from the old evidence room were transported, one by one, to be digitally cataloged. That's when something strange happened. A dusty, mislabeled cardboard box. Faded tape, worn edges, marked only with the year 1987, ripped open during transport. Inside were dozens of items never entered into the digital evidence system. At first, the technicians assumed it was just paperwork, maybe old memos or internal notes that got misfiled. But as they pulled out the contents, their breath caught. Inside the box was a sealed plastic evidence bag containing a broken ceramic garden gnome in 3 pieces, the same one found shattered outside Jeannette's porch the night she vanished. The original detectives had logged the gnome as accidental damage, likely knocked over during the search team's movement through the yard. But that wasn't true. The fracture pattern on the ceramic wasn't caused by a fall or a stomp. It was caused by impact, strong, direct, targeted. A human strike. And that changed everything. Because now, that gnome wasn't just a random piece of debris. It wasn't yard decor. It wasn't trash. It was a weapon that had likely struck something, or someone, hard, and it had been preserved perfectly. The technician in charge of the move contacted the sheriff. Within hours, Jeannette's cold case was reopened. Not slowly, not cautiously, but urgently. In 1987, DNA testing was a primitive science. In 2023, it was an art form, capable of extracting genetic material from the most unlikely surfaces. The newly discovered gnome fragments were sent to a private crime lab in Virginia, known for handling degraded, decades-old materials. Lab technicians ran their first scan and immediately saw something promising. Microscopic reddish-brown traces inside 2 of the fracture seams. Blood, human blood, and not just any blood. Blood preserved inside the porous ceramic surface. It took several weeks, but when the results came back, they revealed the first major break in the case. The blood did not belong to Jeannette. It belonged to a man whose genetic markers suggested he was white, in his late 20s to early 40s at the time of the incident, with particular alleles consistent with European ancestry. But the most important detail was this. The DNA profile was robust, nearly complete, good enough to run through a system that didn't exist when Jeannette vanished. Familial DNA databases, not criminal databases, family databases. And that distinction would lead investigators straight to a monster hiding in plain sight for 3 decades. When the lab ran the profile, they didn't expect much. The chance of finding a direct match from a crime committed in 1987 was slim. But they needed a direct match. They only needed a relative. And that's exactly what they found. A partial match, around 25% shared DNA, was flagged. That level of relation typically indicates a grandchild, a niece/nephew, or a sibling's child. But the name on the match wasn't the suspect. It was a 22-year-old college student from Ohio who who had submitted his DNA to a genealogy platform as part of a family ancestry project. His name was Tyler McKee. The surname didn't matter. What mattered was a genetic connection to the unknown male whose blood was on Jeannette's garden gnome. Investigators reached out. They explained that they were working a cold case. Tyler agreed to cooperate. He provided a full DNA sample voluntarily. When compared to crime scene DNA, it confirmed it. Tyler was the biological grandson of the man whose blood was found on the gnome. But Tyler's grandfather had died in 1997. So the detectives turned their attention to the one man who shared that exact genetic closeness, the man who was alive at the time of the crime, the man who lived within 5 miles of Jeannette's home in 1987, Tyler's uncle, a man named Kevin Holloway. Kevin Holloway lived in Northwood in the late 1980s. He had been 32 at the time Jeannette disappeared. He worked odd jobs, plumbing, roofing, maintenance. He was the type of man blended into rural America without anyone thinking twice. No arrests, no violent history, no recorded altercations. Just an unremarkable man living an unremarkable life. But here's what made him stand out. He lived only 2 streets away from Jeannette's duplex. He owned a dark Ford F-150 from 1984 to 1988. He regularly visited local payphones, especially the one outside Miller's gas station, because, according to old acquaintances, he didn't like people nosing into his calls. And in 1987, he abruptly quit his job at a local hardware store and left town for nearly 7 months. When he returned, people said he was different, more withdrawn, quieter, paranoid, and quick to anger. The pieces started falling into place. But the final confirmation came from the one piece of evidence that had been half forgotten for decades: the mysterious synthetic fibers found in Jeannette's doorway. Those fibers had been matched to a 1985 Ford F-150. But back then, the match was too general to be used alone. Now, combined with the DNA and the genealogical link, it was enough to launch a full investigation. Detectives traveled to rural Arkansas, where Kevin Holloway now lived with his wife in a small farmhouse. He had long left Ohio and Kentucky behind. He was nearing 69 years old, retired, unassuming, living quietly. When they knocked on his door, he opened it slowly. "Can I help you?" he said. Detective Ramos spoke first. "Mr. Holloway, we'd like to ask you some questions about an incident that occurred in Northwood, Pennsylvania, back in 1987. Kevin's face stiffened. He blinked. Once. Twice. Then he said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." But his hands were trembling. The detectives had seen this many times before. It wasn't fear of being falsely accused. It was recognition. They asked if he would come down to the local station to answer a few questions. Kevin hesitated. Then he said something that raised every investigator's antenna. "Does my family know you're here?" Why would that be his first concern? At the station, the interview began politely. Standard questioning, timeline verification, addresses, employment history. Kevin was calm at first, but the moment they asked about Jeannette Ralston, his demeanor changed. His eyes narrowed, his shoulders stiffened, his voice grew sharp. "I didn't know her," he insisted, which wasn't true. Detectives had already interviewed 3 people from the 1980s who remembered seeing Kevin speaking with Jeannette outside the grocery store more than once. He doubled down. "I barely remember that year." Another lie, because people don't forget the year they were questioned in connection with a disappearance. Finally, they asked a big question. "Did you own a dark-colored Ford F-150 in 1987? Silence for 11 long seconds. Then he said, "I had a truck. Yes, I sold it." "Who did you sell it to?" "Don't remember." "Do you remember why you sold it only a few months after Miss Ralston disappeared?" His breathing changed, short, heavy, irregular. "I was moving," he whispered. He wasn't. Detectives had his employment records, showing he continued working locally for 3 more months. Kevin Holloway was unraveling. They knew it. He knew it. And still, he refused to admit anything. But the investigators didn't need a confession. They had something stronger. Science. With the DNA evidence, the familial match, the fiber match, and the inconsistencies in Kevin's statements, detectives obtained a search warrant for his home and property. On July 18th, 2023, a forensic team descended on the Holloway farmhouse. Kevin watched from his porch, jaw clenched, not saying a word. Inside, they found nothing unusual until they entered the detached workshop behind the house. There, hanging on the wall, were dozens of tools, some old, some new. But on a back shelf, underneath a tarp, they found something that made everyone freeze. A rusted metal toolbox, marked with a faint engraving, HW 87, likely his initials. Inside the toolbox were rope fibers, duct tape rolls from the 1980s, a pair of men's gloves, and, most disturbing of all, a silver teardrop earring, the same style Jeannette was wearing the night she disappeared. DNA analysis confirmed trace skin cells in the earring's clasp. Jeannette's. This was the second physical item ever recovered that contained her DNA. It was the missing half of her earring set. There was no more doubt. None. Kevin Holloway never reported finding the earring, never returned it, never mentioned it once during interviews. He had kept it for decades. A souvenir, a trophy. It was enough for an arrest warrant. On the morning of July 21st, 2023, deputies and state police returned to the Holloway residence. Kevin was sitting on his porch in a rocking chair, staring at the open field beyond his barn. He didn't look surprised. Maybe he knew the end was coming. Maybe he had been waiting for it all his life. When Detective Ramos approached him, badge visible, warrant in hand, Kevin didn't stand up. He didn't ask why. He didn't protest. He didn't even speak. He simply lifted his hands, palms outward, like a man surrendering not to police, but to fate itself. Kevin Holloway, the detective said, "You are under arrest for the kidnapping and murder of Jeannette Ralston." For a moment, Kevin closed his eyes. A long moment. And then he whispered, "I knew someone would come eventually." Those were his first true words of the entire investigation. He didn't fight, didn't struggle, didn't plead. He just hung his head as they placed the cuffs on his wrists. His wife cried out, collapsing onto the steps, asking what was happening. Kevin didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone. He stared at the ground, hollow, empty, as a patrol car pulled away. Neighbors stood silently in their yards, hands covering their mouths, eyes wide with disbelief. Because in Northwood, Kevin Holloway had been just another face, just another man, a quiet one, a polite one, a normal one. He was the kind you greeted but never thought about twice. No one imagined he'd been living among them all these years with a secret so dark, so heavy, so monstrous. No one imagined he had taken Jeannette. No one imagined he had gotten away with it for 36 years. When news of the arrest broke, Northwood didn't celebrate. They didn't cheer. They didn't rejoice in the capture of a long-hidden predator. Instead, there was quiet, a solemn quiet, because justice had come. Yes, but closure? Closure was different. People remember where they were the night Jeannette disappeared. They remembered searching the woods. They remembered their fear, their heartbreak, their unanswered questions. Now, 36 years later, those emotions flooded back. Relief that the mystery was finally solved. Grief for what Jeannette endured. Guilt that her killer had walked among them. And shock that he had been so ordinary. Parents who had once been children during the search cried openly. Teachers who had worked with Jeannette placed flowers at her memorial garden. Former students left handwritten notes. "Thank you for teaching me to read. You inspire me to become a teacher, too. We never forgot you." Northwood finally had a name, a suspect, a face, and soon they would have the full truth of what happened that terrible night. But one question remained, the one that had haunted her family for decades. Why Jeannette? That answer would come only after the interrogation, and it would be more disturbing than anyone expected. If you're still with this story and want to hear the rest of this incredible case, what happened during interrogation, what Kevin finally admitted, and how Jeannette's family responded, make sure you're subscribed. It helps more than you know, and it ensures stories like hers are never forgotten. Some stories fade because time pulls them away. But others endure because someone keeps clawing at the truth. For Maple Hollow, the investigation into Jeannette Ralston's disappearance had always felt like a ghost lingering in the fringe of every conversation. From the diner waitress who still kept Jeanette's school photo taped inside her recipe book, to the elderly men who played chess outside the hardware store and insisted that the girl deserved better. But with Detective Hall back on the case, deserved better became a mission, not a memory. And the deeper he dug, the more the town realized that the truth had never disappeared. It had been hidden in plain sight. Hall started by reconstructing Jeanette's last 24 hours. Every mile she walked, every friend she met, every person who saw her, and most importantly, everyone who might have wanted her gone. But the trail Hall uncovered wasn't a straight line. It was a maze filled with jealousy, secrets, grudges, and a town that held far more whispers than anyone ever admitted. To understand what happened to Jeannette, Hall first needed to understand her life. The day she vanished, August 13th, 1996, was humid and sticky. The kind of day where heat clung to your clothes and tempers ran a little shorter. She had spent the afternoon working a shift at the Clover Diner. Her best friend, Maggie Andrews, told Hall she had walked Jeannette home around 7:45 p.m. "We waved," Maggie said, and she smiled. "I remember thinking I'd never seen her look so tired." Hall pressed. "Tired, how?" Maggie shrugged. "Not sleepy. Like something was weighing on her. Like she was thinking too much." Hall made a note. That same evening, a neighbor reported seeing Jeannette sitting on the front steps of her house, talking on a cordless phone. Another claimed she saw a dark-colored pickup truck idling near the corner. And a teenage boy walking his dog said he heard a girl shout, "Leave me alone," though he couldn't be sure where it came from. None of these leads were ever thoroughly pursued back in '96. Hall couldn't believe it. So many threads, he murmured to himself, all left hanging. One by one, he began pulling them. The first breakthrough was the easiest and most embarrassing for the original investigation. Back then, Jeanette's phone records had been requested. They just never arrived. Somewhere along the bureaucratic chain, the request was filed but not followed. When the case went cold, the records were boxed away with everything else. Hall found them on the third day. There, tucked between report memos and outdated witness statements, was a fax sheet stamped. AT&T residential call log, August 1996. One call stood out. A 23-minute conversation placed at 7:52 p.m., exactly around the time Maggie said she last saw Jeannette. The number was familiar to Hall. He had seen it earlier in the case file attached to a different statement. The call had gone to Stephen Murphy, Jeanette's ex-boyfriend, the one who, at the age of 19, was already known in town for his temper. Some people avoid their past. Stephen seemed to be hiding from his. He lived 12 miles outside town, in a weather-beaten mobile home, scattered with car parts and beer cans. The yard had the kind of silence that felt suspicious on its own, too still, too controlled. Hall knocked. Stephen opened the door slowly, squinting like he hadn't expected anyone, especially not a detective. "What do you want?" he muttered. "Your help," Hall replied calmly. "It's about Jeannette Ralston." A flicker of something. Annoyance? Fear? Crossed Stephen's face. "That again? I told all this to cops years ago." "You did," Hall said, "but we didn't have her phone records before. Now we do." Stephen's posture stiffened. "So, you talked to her the night she disappeared. For 23 minutes. Stephen exhaled loudly, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Yeah, okay. We talked. She called me." "Why?" Hall pressed. Stephen shrugged. "She was upset. Said someone was bothering her. Didn't say who." A lie. Hall felt it. Not because Stephen sounded unconvincing, but because he sounded too prepared. Like he had rehearsed that answer for 29 years. Hall tilted his head. "Did you meet her that night?" Stephen shook his head. "No, I stayed home." Anyone who can confirm that. No. Convenient, Hall thought. But Stephen didn't look like a man who felt confident. He looked like someone who'd been waiting decades for a knock on the door, whether out of guilt or fear the truth resurfacing? Hall left with more questions than answers. News of the reopened case spread fast, and as often happens, whispers turned into phone calls. On the morning of Hall's fourth week on the case, he received a voicemail from a shaky female voice. "Detective Hall, I think I saw something. Something back then. I'm sorry I didn't come forward sooner. I was scared." The caller was Elise Harrow, a former neighbor of the Ralstons. She had moved away shortly after Jeannette vanished. Hall drove out to her new address, a quiet senior living apartment 20 minutes north. Elise answered the door with trembling hands. "You have no idea how long I prayed someone would come ask me," she whispered. She led Hall to her living room and sat down slowly. "I lived across from the Ralstons. My bedroom window faced their front yard. That night, I couldn't sleep. Too hot. So I opened the window." Hall leaned forward. "What did you see, Elise?" "A man," she said, "standing near Jeanette's mailbox." She swallowed hard. He was arguing with her. Not shouting, but intense. She looked scared. Hall felt a chill creep along his spine. "Did you recognize the man?" Elise nodded. It was Sheriff Dean Harper. Hall froze. Dean Harper, the sheriff who originally handled Jeanette's case. The man who declared it a runaway on day one. The man the town trusted, maybe too much. "You're sure?" Hall asked softly. "As sure as I'm sitting here." Hall's heart pounded. Dean Harper had been a decorated figure in Maple Hollow. A leader, a role model. But Hall also knew something else. Harper had resigned abruptly 6 months after Jeannette disappeared. He claimed health issues, but no one ever questioned it. Until now. What was he doing? Hall asked. Elise wiped tears from her eyes. He grabbed her arm. She tried to pull away. Then a truck came down the street, and I ducked. When I looked again, they were gone. Gone. Hall felt the room tighten around him. Everything he thought he knew, every lead he had pulled, every suspect he had narrowed in on, all of it shifted in an instant. Because if Elise was telling the truth, the man responsible for burying Jeanette's case might also be the man responsible for her disappearance. Hall revisited the original case logs with a new lens. Dean Harper had written nearly every report, every witness statement, every timeline reconstruction, every theory dismissing foul play. And suddenly, Hall realized something chilling. Not a single document mentioned Harper's whereabouts on the night of August 13th. Not one. Even stranger, the note about the dark pickup truck? Missing. The boy who heard a girl yell, "Leave me alone?" Missing. A waitress who said Jeanette left work earlier than usual? Missing. Too many things were missing. Hall sat at his desk, staring at the evidence boards, Jeanette's photos staring back at him. A sinking certainty washed over him. "These weren't oversights," he whispered. "They were removed." By who? By someone who needed the case to disappear. Someone with power, access, and a reputation to protect. Dean Harper was 68 now, white-haired, slower, living in a cozy farmhouse on the outskirts of town, surrounded by trophies from his law enforcement career. His house was a shrine to the man he once was. Hall arrived unannounced. Harper opened the door with a forced smile. "Well, this is unexpected. You're the young detective everyone keeps talking about." Hall didn't waste time. "I'm here about Jeannette Ralston." Harper's face didn't flinch, but his eyes narrowed. "What about her?" "I reopened the case," Hall replied evenly. "I'm following new leads." Harper crossed his arms. "Leads? After almost 30 years? That's a fool's errand." "Maybe," Hall said, "but some people are still talking." "People say things," Harper snapped. "Doesn't mean they're true." Hall nodded slowly. "Were you near the Ralston house the night she disappeared?" Harper's expression froze. "That was decades ago." "So, you don't remember?" "I remember that girl caused a lot of trouble," Harper said sharply. "Always hanging around the wrong boys. Staying out late. Running from home. That's not what her family says." Harper shrugged. "Parents see what they want to see." There it was. The deflection. The irritation. The cracks. Hall watched the former sheriff carefully. Did you know she called Stephen Murphy that night? 23 minutes on the phone. Harper stiffened. No, and it's irrelevant. Is it? Harper's jaw tightened. Detective, I led this town for 20 years. I know how to read people. That girl ran away. That's what I concluded then, and that's what I still believe. Hall held his gaze. And if you're wrong? Harper stepped closer. I'm never wrong. But for the first time, Hall saw something behind Harper's confidence. Fear, a flicker of it, barely visible, but there. Hall thanked him politely and left. Not because he was done questioning him, but because he now had enough reason to take the investigation even deeper. Hall obtained a warrant to access archived Sheriff Department communications from '96. Phone logs, duty rosters, dispatch records. It took days of sifting through microfilm and dusty folders, but eventually he found it. A torn page from the patrol log. One entry had been ripped out entirely. And the missing timestamp? 8:15 p.m. The exact window Jeannette was last seen alive. But he found something else too. The edge of the torn page had faint indents, like someone had written hard enough with a pen to leave impressions on the next sheet below. Hall borrowed an oblique light, the same technique used in forgery detection. Slowly, the letters emerged. S.H. Sherry, Sheriff H. Sheriff Harper. Hall whispered to himself. You were there. He had no proof yet, not solid proof. But the shadow of the truth was becoming visible, and someone didn't want him to find the rest. The more Hall uncovered, the more dangerous the case became. He began receiving anonymous calls, hearing cars idle outside his home late at night, finding his mailbox open, even when he was sure he'd closed it. At first, he dismissed it. Investigators attract attention, wanted and unwanted. But on a Thursday evening, as he walked to his car after lunch, he noticed something wedged beneath his windshield wiper. A torn scrap of paper. Only 5 words written on it. Stop digging for your own good. Hall didn't flinch. Threats meant one thing. He was getting close. 5 weeks into the reopened investigation, Hall made a discovery that reframed the entire case. Jeannette Ralston hadn't been a runaway. She hadn't been reckless. She hadn't been the troubled girl. Some people claimed she was. She had been a witness to something she should never have seen. Hall discovered an old, forgotten police report filed by Jeanette's mother 3 months before her disappearance. The report stated, Jeannette found trespassing near county storage lot. Claimed she saw a man hiding something in a blue barrel. Requested follow-up. No action taken. Hall stared at the document. A blue barrel. Hidden. Late at night. And the officer who signed off on the recommendation to dismiss the report? Sheriff Dean Harper. Hall exhaled shakily. Everything pointed to one possibility. Jeannette hadn't disappeared because of a fight or a boyfriend or teenage recklessness. She disappeared because she knew something. Something about the sheriff. Something he couldn't risk getting out. As rumors spread, Maple Hollow transformed again. Some residents defended Harper fiercely. He kept us safe for years. That man wouldn't hurt a fly. Others believed the worst. Men in power hide the most. And some people, those whose loved ones had also been ignored or dismissed, felt vindicated. This town has covered up too much for too long. Tension thickened. Lines were drawn. Whispers became arguments. But Hall pressed on, because now he wasn't just solving a cold case. He was pulling the lid off something Maple Hollow had buried deep. 6 weeks in, Hall received a call from a forestry worker clearing brush near the old county storage lot. You might want to come see this, the man said nervously. Hall arrived to find a section of earth recently disturbed, soil still looser than the surrounding ground. The worker pointed at something pale sticking up from the dirt. At first glance, it looked like bone. Human bone. Hall's breath caught. He kneeled, brushing away soil with gloved hands. There, half buried, was a human femur. Nearby, fragments of decayed fabric. Buttons. A watch engraved with initials. J.R. Jeannette Ralston. Hall closed his eyes for a moment. 29 years of searching had finally led to her. She had been here the whole time, buried not far from where she witnessed something she wasn't supposed to see. Hall swallowed hard, whispering to himself, "I found you, Jeannette." Nearby, something else glinted in the dirt, a rusted piece of metal. He lifted it gently. It was part of a law enforcement badge. Hall stared at it, stunned, but the number was barely visible, corroded by time and soil. Still, enough remained to read the engraved ID. Number 147S. Harper. It wasn't just a clue. It was a message, and the man who buried that badge had meant for it to stay buried forever. But it didn't. Hall now had the single most damning piece of evidence tying Dean Harper to Jeannette's final moments. This wasn't a case anymore. It was a reckoning. Hall presented the findings to the district attorney. The bones, the watch, the badge fragment, the repressed witness statements, the falsified logs, the threats, the phone records. The DA listened silently for a long time, then finally said, "Write the warrant." Hall had waited weeks for this moment. The town had waited decades. The Ralston family had been waiting a lifetime. Hall filed the paperwork and prepared the team, because once they knocked on the former sheriff's door, Maple Hollow would never be the same. Hall held the rusted metal in his hand, brushing away clumps of dirt until its shape became unmistakable. A badge. Sheriff's badge number 102. Dean Harper's badge from the 1990s. Hall stared at it, feeling the weight of what he was holding. Not just metal, but history. A history the town had buried, willingly or unknowingly, right along with Jeannette. The forensic techs on site exchanged glances as Hall stood frozen. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Document everything. Photograph the site. No one touches that badge until it's logged." Then he stepped back, hands shaking slightly. This changed the entire direction of the case. Because a sheriff doesn't lose a badge. He doesn't drop it. He doesn't accidentally bury it near a body. Not unless he was there. Not unless he put the body there. News of the remains spread like wildfire. Small towns have a way of passing secrets faster than sirens. Reporters showed up. Old rumors resurfaced. People who once defended Harper began to waver. And those who always feared him finally spoke out. Hall drove back to the station under a sky thickening with storm clouds. The weight on his shoulders fell heavier with every mile. When he stepped inside, the room fell silent. Officers staring at it with a mix of respect and fear. Chief Rourke approached him. "Is it her?" he asked quietly. Hall nodded once. Rourke exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for 29 years. "This isn't just a cold case anymore," Rourke said. "This is going to change this town." Hall swallowed. It already has. He knew what needed to happen next. But arresting a former sheriff, one who still had allies in high places, wouldn't be simple. And Hall wasn't convinced that Harper acted alone. Something about the burial site felt too sloppy, too revealing. Men like Harper didn't make mistakes like dropping their badges. Unless someone wanted the badge found. That night, Hall returned to the evidence board alone. Jeannette's photo, the badge, the torn patrol log, witness statements, phone records, the storage lot report. But now, an unsettling thought gnawed at him. Why would Harper bury his own badge with the body? He wouldn't. Not unless, 1, he panicked. 2, he was framed. 3, someone was there with him. Hall tapped the marker against the board, circling the burial site. The dirt had looked disturbed recently, not decades old. The forestry worker had said, "Looks like it was raked over again not long ago." Why would someone return to a burial site nearly 30 years later? To hide something? Or to reveal something? Hall whispered. Who went back and why? At 11:42 p.m., Hall's phone vibrated. Unknown number. He answered. A voice, shaky, breathless, came through. "Detective Hall, please. I didn't know who else to call." It was a woman, middle-aged, crying. "Who is this?" Hall asked gently. "My name is Karen Harper." Hall froze. Dean Harper's ex-wife. They had divorced a year after Jeannette disappeared. Rumors said it was messy, violent arguments, sleepless nights, and a settlement she signed quickly just to escape. What's wrong? Hall asked. You need to come to my house, she said. There are things I should have told the police years ago. Things I've been afraid to say. Hall grabbed his keys. Are you safe, Karen? A pause. Yes, for now. For now chilled him. I'm on my way. Karen Harper lived in a small duplex behind the elementary school. Hall arrived to find her pacing the living room, wringing her hands, eyes red from crying. Thank you for coming, she whispered. Tell me everything, Hall said softly. She sat. I left Dean because I was scared of him. The man everyone saw wasn't the man I lived with. Hall nodded. What does this have to do with Jeannette? Karen inhaled sharply. Everything. Her hands trembled. That summer, Dean came home one night shaking. He had dirt on his boots. His shirt was torn. He said he'd been in a fight. Hall leaned forward. What night was that? Karen's eyes filled. August 13th. Hall's pulse quickened. Karen wiped tears from her cheek. He told me he had handled something for the good of the town. I didn't know what he meant. He said the girl was a threat. Hall's voice was barely a whisper. Did he say her name? Karen nodded. Jeannette. A tear rolled down her cheek. He said she saw something she shouldn't have. Something in the storage lot. He was furious that she told someone. Hall felt his breath catch. Who did she tell? He asked. Karen stared at him. You're not going to like the answer. Hall braced himself. She told another officer. Hall blinked. What officer? Karen whispered. Officer Stephen Murphy. Hall froze. No, that didn't fit. That changed everything. Stephen Murphy wasn't just an ex-boyfriend. He was a rookie cop in 1996. One with access. One with ambition. One whose file had a glowing recommendation from Sheriff Harper. One who was on duty the night Jeannette disappeared. Hall stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. Karen flinched. Detective, she whispered. Hall's mind raced. The phone call between Stephen and Jeannette. Her fear, his alibi, his connection to Harper, the missing page from the patrol log. It all snapped into place. Karen, Hall said gently, why are you telling me this now? She swallowed. Because Dean came to my house yesterday. He told me someone was asking questions. He told me to keep quiet or else. Hall's blood ran cold. Is he watching you? Karen nodded, tears spilling. He said if I opened my mouth, I'd end up just like her. Hall exhaled shakily. You did the right thing. She covered her face. I'm so sorry I didn't speak sooner. Maybe that girl would have been found. Maybe this wouldn't have dragged on so long. Hall placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. It's not your fault. This is on them. Hall walked out into the cold night air, heart pounding. For years, the town assumed Harper was a monster behind Jeannette's disappearance. And maybe he was involved. But the truth was darker, more twisted, more dangerous. Stephen Murphy, ex-boyfriend, rookie officer, the last person she called, the man she trusted enough to report what she saw. He was in it, and Harper helped cover it up. Not because he was the mastermind, but because he was protecting one of his own, a promising young officer with a temper, a man who would later leave the force quietly after personal issues, a man who lived isolated, paranoid, angry, a man Hall had already interviewed, a man who lied. Hall whispered into the darkness. Stephen, what did you do? Hall sped to Stephen's home. Lights off, yard silent, truck gone. The door was ajar. Hall unholstered his weapon, stepping inside. Stephen, this is Detective Hall. You need to come out. No answer. The house smelled like stale cigarettes and gasoline. On the kitchen table lay an envelope with Hall's name on it. Hall opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. 5 words. You should have stopped digging. And beneath it, a photograph. A photograph of Hall's house. Taken from across the street. Taken recently. Hall's stomach dropped. This wasn't just a fight for justice anymore. This was personal. Stephen wasn't running. He was hunting. And Hall knew exactly where he was going next. To the one man who could protect him, Dean Harper. The night air in Northwood felt heavier than usual, as if the town itself sensed what was coming. Hall stepped onto Harper's street quietly, painfully aware of every crunch of gravel under his boots. His breath formed white clouds in the air. Proof he was still alive, still fighting, still in the middle of something far larger than any cold case. Harper's house sat at the edge of town, far from neighbors, shielded by pine trees that formed a natural wall. A perfect place for secrets. A perfect place for men like Harper and Stephen. Hall approached with caution. No lights, no vehicles, no sound, but the front door was wide open. A bad sign, a deliberate one. Hall drew his weapon and stepped inside. Stephen, Sheriff's Department. Dean Harper, show yourselves. Silence, but not the harmless kind, the charged, waiting kind. Hall scanned the living room. Furniture overturned, a lamp smashed, a picture frame shattered on the floor. The kind of chaos that came from a struggle, a violent one. He moved deeper into the house. The hallway was dark, too dark. Then he heard it, a soft, rattling breath coming from the kitchen. Hall turned the corner and froze. Dean Harper lay sprawled across the tile, one side of his face swollen, blood along his jaw, a gash on his forehead. His right arm bent unnaturally, but he was alive, barely. His eyes fluttered open when he heard Hall. "You took your time," Harper rasped. Hall knelt beside him. "Where's Stephen, Dean? What did he do?" Harper coughed, spitting blood. "You shouldn't." Another cough. "Shouldn't have come alone." "Where is he?" Hall demanded. Harper gave a weak shake of his head. "He's gone." "Gone where?" Harper looked up at him, broken, defeated, terrified. To finish what he started. Hall's pulse kicked into high gear. "You mean Karen?" Hall asked. Harper shook his head. "No, not her." Hall stiffened. He didn't need the answer. He already knew. Stephen was coming for Hall. Hall ran from the house, radio and dispatch as he sprinted to his truck. Unit 14 requesting immediate backup at 912 Pine Crest Road. Assault on a former officer. Suspect is Stephen Murphy. Armed and dangerous. Possible pursuit in progress. The radio crackled back. "Copy that, 14. Units en route." Hall tore down the road, engine roaring, searching every intersection, every alleyway, every stretch of dark asphalt. Stephen wasn't subtle. He wasn't careful. He was emotional, impulsive, the type of man who reacted, not planned. Hall knew exactly where he would go. Hall's house. And worse, Hall's teenage daughter was home. Hall took a sharp turn onto Oak River Lane, tires screaming against pavement. His house came into view, a two-story structure with warm lights glowing through the living room curtains. But something was wrong. The front door was open. Hall's heart nearly stopped. He parked crooked, jumped out, and sprinted to the door with his weapon drawn. "Emily! Emily!" No answer. He stepped inside, breath shaking. His daughter's backpack was on the floor near the hallway. Her shoes still by the door. A mug shattered on the kitchen tile. And then, from upstairs, a thud. Hall bolted up the steps, taking them 3 at a time. "Emily, say something." A small voice cried out from behind her bedroom door. "Dad!" Hall kicked the door open. Emily stood in the corner, shaking, tears streaming down her face. He rushed to her, pulling her into his arms. "Oh, God, are you hurt?" She shook her head violently. He was here, Dad. He was in the house." Hall's spine went cold. "Where did he go?" She pointed toward the window. "He said you were ruining everything. He said you should have stayed out of it." Hall looked at the open window, curtains fluttering. Stephen had been here minutes ago. Close. Too close. But Emily was safe. That was all that mattered. Hall took her face in his hands. "Listen to me. Go downstairs. 2 officers are about to arrive. You leave with them and do not come back until I tell you." She nodded, terrified. Hall kissed her forehead and stood. Stephen had crossed a line. He wasn't just trying to evade arrest. He was trying to destroy everyone who threatened his secret. Jeannette, Harper, Karen, and now Hall's family. This was no longer a case. This was a hunt, and Hall wasn't the prey. Hall searched the perimeter outside the house, scanning the tree line, broken branches, footprints, mud spatters, signs of someone running. Stephen was heading west, toward the woods, toward the old forestry trails, toward isolation. Hall followed the tracks in his truck until the dirt became too uneven for vehicles. Then he continued on foot. The woods were dark, moonlight slicing through branches, wind howling like a warning. Hall gripped his flashlight in one hand, pistol in the other. "Stephen," he called out. "Stop running. You're done. It's over." Silence. Then a voice echoed through the trees. "You don't get it, detective." Hall spun in the direction of sound. "You think this is about her? About Jeannette?" Hall steadied his weapon. "Put your hands where I can see them." A laugh floated back, unstable, bitter, exhausted. She wasn't supposed to talk. I told her to keep quiet, but she told Dean, and Dean told me. A branch snapped behind Hall. Stephen was circling him. Hall didn't turn. He stayed absolutely still. Stephen continued. "I wasn't a bad guy at first. I loved her, but she said she saw something that would ruin everything." Hall's voice remained calm. "What did she see, Stephen?" A sigh. "She saw me take the money." Hall felt the truth hit, like a punch to the chest. Not murder, not jealousy, not obsession. Corruption. Drug bust money. Stephen continued. "It was supposed to be off books. Easy cash. But Jeannette, she showed up early for tutoring. Wrong place, wrong time." Hall swallowed hard. "And instead of turning yourself in, you silenced her." From the darkness, Stephen whispered. "She cried when I grabbed her. She begged me to let her go." Hall gripped his gun tighter. "You buried her. You took her life. You terrorized this town." A soft movement behind him. Then, "You're right behind me, aren't you?" Hall said quietly. Stephen's breath brushed the back of his neck. "I had no choice." Hall spun. Stephen lunged. A struggle erupted in the dark, violent, chaotic. Hall slammed Stephen against a tree. Stephen swung wildly, fist connecting with Hall's jaw. Hall staggered back, tasted blood. Stephen raised a knife. "You should have dropped the case, detective." Hall fired. The sound exploded through the forest. Stephen collapsed onto his knees, clutching his leg, howling in pain. Hall approached him slowly, gun still trained. "It's over," Hall breathed. Stephen looked up at him. Hatred and fear twisted together. "You ruined everything," he spat. Hall shook his head. "No, Stephen, you did." Sirens wailed in the distance. Backup was close. Stephen's fight drained away. He fell backward into the leaves, breathing hard. And for the first time in 29 years, Jeannette Ralston finally had her voice again. Officers flooded the forest trail, weapons ready. Hall holstered his own and stepped back as paramedics moved in. Chief Rourke approached him. "Is it him?" Hall nodded. "We've got him. Alive." Rourke exhaled shakily. "Good. He's going to face this in court." Stephen was handcuffed on the ground, groaning in pain as officers lifted him onto a stretcher. He glared at Hall the entire time. "You think you won?" he hissed. Hall didn't flinch. This was never about winning. He leaned in. This was about Jeannette. Stephen looked away, jaw clenched. The lights, the sirens, the flashing red and blue. Every second of it felt like the end of a nightmare. But Hall knew this was just the beginning of Northwood's healing. The sirens faded into the night, leaving Hall standing in the forest, surrounded by officers and the cool scent of pine. Stephen Murphy's capture marked the first tangible victory in nearly 3 decades. But Hall knew the hardest part wasn't over, not by a long shot. At the police station, Stephen sat alone in the interrogation room, his clothes torn, his hands cuffed, his face pale and sallow from stress and injury. He hadn't spoken since being placed in the cell. Hall entered, placing a file on the table. "Stephen," Hall began, voice steady but firm, "this is your chance to tell the truth. Every detail. The full story." Stephen's eyes darted around the room, avoiding Hall's gaze. Hall continued, softer this time. "Jeannette Ralston deserves that. So does your town. And your life. Right now. You can start by telling us exactly what happened that night." Silence. Then a long, shuddering breath. I didn't mean to hurt her," Stephen muttered. Hall leaned closer. "You did. Tell me why." Stephen's shoulders sagged. Tears formed in the corners of his eyes. She saw something she shouldn't have," he whispered. "The money. The stash we were supposed to move. Dean, he told me to keep it quiet. I panicked. I grabbed her," she fought. "I didn't know what to do. I buried her in the forest behind the storage lot." Hall listened carefully, recording every word. "She screamed. I tried to stop her from running, but..." Stephen's voice broke. "I didn't mean to. I was scared of losing everything." The fear, guilt, and panic in his voice filled the room. "Every single person she told. Dean covered for me. All those years it was him. He wanted me safe. I thought it was right." Hall's jaw tightened. "It wasn't right. It was murder," he said quietly. Stephen bowed his head. I know. I can't take it back, never." Using Stephen's detailed account, Hall and the forensic team revisited the original sites, carefully combing through decades of overgrowth and debris. They uncovered Jeannette's school bag hidden beneath pine needles, personal effects, including a diary confirming her fear and her attempts to report suspicious activity before her disappearance, cash and items related to the off-the-book stash, proving Stephen's claim about the motive. Every piece corroborated the confession, every item telling the story that Maple Hollow had wanted to forget. And for Hall, each discovery carried the weight of decades, justice deferred, finally arriving. The arrest and confession sent shockwaves through Maple Hollow. At the diner, regulars whispered behind coffee cups. "I can't believe it," said one older man. "Dean Harper? Stephen Murphy? After all these years." In schools, teachers try to explain to students why history sometimes comes back, why actions have consequences, and why even small towns have secrets. Families who had prayed silently for decades felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. And for Jeannette's parents, the emotions were a tidal wave. Grief mingled with the bittersweet closure they never thought they'd see. "I never thought we'd find her," her mother said, holding her late daughter's photograph close. "But at least now we know. We know the truth." Jeannette's body was laid to rest with dignity, decades after she was taken. The funeral drew hundreds of residents, many of whom had grown up with her memory etched in their lives. Flowers covered the coffin. Candles burned along the paths of Maple Hollow Cemetery. A pastor spoke of resilience, of courage, and of the town finally confronting its past. Hall watched silently, thinking of the girl he never met, the family who waited so long, and the justice that finally arrived. Afterward, a memorial was placed at the site where she was discovered. A simple stone, engraved with her name and a quote from her diary. "I hope someone sees the truth one day." Now someone had. In the days following the arrest and confession, Hall walked the streets of Maple Hollow. He saw the whispers fade. People were cautious but calmer. Children played freely again in parks where Jeannette's memory lingered, and yet the town had begun to heal. Hall reflected on the pattern of deception, fear, and silence. Power can shield the guilty. Time can bury the truth, but it doesn't erase it. Courage, sometimes quiet, sometimes desperate, is what allows justice to emerge. In his heart, Hall knew that the Jeannette Ralston case was more than just a solved crime. It was a story of resilience, accountability, and the enduring human need for closure. He also understood something else. Justice might be delayed, but it will always arrive when the right people refuse to let it go. Maple Hollow's story is a reminder for all of us. Vigilance matters. Witness something unusual. Speak up, and never underestimate the power of persistence. If Jeannette's story moved you, subscribe to this channel. Share to honor her memory, and support the families still waiting for answers. because every voice matters, and every story deserves to be heard. And remember, justice may be slow, but will always find its way.